Thank God for Wonder Woman.
Beach bubbles, they're very old media, a bit like this week. We've got the internet now.
Thanks, Phil. I think we'll leave it to the women. Evening all, welcome to This Week, a week in which the evidence mounted that the Russian state, or its surrogates, had indeed attempted to assassinate a former Russian spy now living in Salisbury, jeopardising the lives of his daughter and a British bobby in the process. The British reaction was to stop Prince William from going to the World Cup. Sources in Moscow tell me this alone has reduced President Putin to a quivering wreck. He's refusing to leave his bedroom, and the white flag could soon be flying over the Kremlin. That'll teach him. Don't mess with the Brits, or you won't get to meet Meghan Markle next. Back in Blighty, the Maybot had a visit from her new best friend, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. The British are keen to portray him as a moderniser, which is only fair, as long as you don't mind him turning Yemen into a Saudi Vietnam with attendant atrocities and humanitarian disasters. Our reports that beheadings in his kingdom have doubled since he was designated reforming heir last June. I suppose it depends on what you mean by reform. Some of Jez's soulmates on the Labour left boasted that they had joined the protests against his visit. Strangely, I've yet to see them outside the Russian, Syrian or Iranian embassies. But we all know they've committed no atrocities in battle, and all three are exemplary when it comes to human rights. Or maybe I just missed the protesters and that they're outside the embassy now. In Brussels, Michel Barnier, the Commission's chief Brexit negotiator, revealed the EU's bargaining position for the next round of talks. After a year of warning the Brits that they could not cherry-pick, he proceeded to cherry-pick with a gusto that matched Jack Cherry McCherry-Picker the year he won the Cherry Picker of the Year competition. Even some of the British media realised it was just a bargaining position. Speaking of those you wouldn't pick to wash your socks, much less pick and peel your cherries, I'm joined on the sofa tonight by two veterans of Cold War spying, without whose services this country would be a much safer place. I speak, of course, of Michael #Choo-Choo Portillo and Caroline #Twinkle Toes Flint. Welcome to you both. Michael, your moment of the week?
Surrounded by helmeted steel workers, President Donald Trump put tariffs on imports of steel into the United States, thus fulfilling a very important pledge that he had made to the Rust Belt in the United States. Some people immediately say that this is bad news for Brexit because, after all, we were counting on making free trade deals with the United States, which has gone into protectionist mode. But Donald Trump was denounced immediately by Donald Tusk, the President of the European Council, for putting on tariffs. Now, I think that's actually quite significant because, of course, tariffs are the wrong thing to do. Although the European Union, of course, shelters behind tariffs inside its customs union and single market. But I do think it's going to be quite hard for Europe, for the European Union, to end up with a situation where it applies tariffs to the United Kingdom when it has so evidently committed itself against tariffs being applied by the United States.
OK, we shall see. It's another factor in the grand Brexit debacle. Caroline, your moment?
Well, my moment was on Sunday when my daughter and I, my adult daughter, and I joined women for the March for Women up to Trafalgar Square. We followed the route of suffragettes some 100-odd years ago. And it was special for two reasons. Obviously, it was my daughter, but I think it's the first march that I haven't been responsible for dragging my daughter as a child onto various protests. So it was her choice this time, and it was quite a nice moment.
Very well. Now, the great financial crash of 2008 was a genuine crisis of capitalism caused by cavalier capitalists in banking and finance. Its painful consequences were inflicted across the board on plain folk who'd done nothing to deserve being its victims. So who would have thought a decade later that the main political casualty of the crash would be not the mainstream right, home of politicians most associated with capitalism, markets, deregulation, but the mainstream left. Yet almost everywhere we look across Europe, traditional social democratic parties are in ragged retreat, some facing extinction. Reduced to a rump in Greece, France and Holland, their worst result for 70 years in Germany, marginalised in Italy only last weekend, struggling even in social democracy's Scandinavian heartlands. And it's not just a continental thing. In Britain, Labour's Social Democrats have had to cede power to leadership of a more Marxist hue. In America, the centre-left Democrats couldn't even beat Donald Trump, the epitome of buccaneering capitalism. So what's going wrong? We turn to Slovenian philosopher extraordinaire Slavoj Zizek, and this is his take of the week.
Ciao, I'm Chef Slavoj, and I'm here to introduce you to my Italian kitchen. Today, capitalism is clearly entering its final crisis. This is not a leftist nightmare or dream. Even progressive corporate figures like Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates know it. But there is no organized left to offer a viable alternative or a vision of life after capitalism. So all we get is just a protracted decay. The great German thinker Walter Benjamin said back in 1930s that every rise of fascism is the sign of a failed revolution. And I think this holds today more than ever. The radical left proved its inability in Greece, where the Syriza government ended up as the most faithful enabler of the austerity politics. The latest election results in Italy, as well as the fragile coalition in Germany, also demonstrate that the moderate social democratic left is just gradually flattening. Now a new opposition is replacing the traditional polarity of moderate left and moderate right. It's the opposition between liberal establishment and the rightist populism as a reaction to it. The explosive rise of populism all around Europe simply fills in the void of the left's failure. We are thus caught in a vicious cycle which I think can be broken only by a new reinvented left. And unfortunately, we all know what lies ahead if this new left will not appear. A new authoritarian capitalism which is now spreading all around the globe, from Trump to Putin, from Turkey to China. our social muscles are already acting. There are protests all around. But will they reinvigorate our nerves, a new leftist vision, or will they remain just a blind, contractive movement? Buonissimo.
And our thanks to the Divertimenti Cookery School at the Brompton Road for the use of their beautiful kitchen. Chef Savoy didn't do the washing up, but he is with us here now. Welcome back to the studio. Michael, listening to that take, though, I still didn't get an explanation, I don't know whether you did, of why it's the mainstream left that's taken a hit since the financial crash rather than the mainstream right.
Well, actually, I think on the whole, both have taken a hit. I mean, Mrs. Merkel did pretty badly in the last German election. Macron replaced a right-wing party in France. That party has virtually disappeared for the time being. In Italy, the mainstream
Well,
right,
he's actually replaced the socialists in France in the presidential thing took a much bigger hit than the Gaullists.
But both sides are taking a hit. That's my point. In Spain as well, it's true that the right is in power at the moment, but there are now 4 main parties where there used to be 2. Now, I do think that it was right to say that there is a division between the populist right and the elites, the liberal elites. And that is because the liberal elites are distant, they are haughty, they are detached from real people's issues. And I think one of the main factors that there has been, which has illustrated that aloofness, has been the immigration policy, where I think really the left has had nothing to say. But immigration has been, in the case of Mrs. Merkel, also extraordinarily damaging to the right. So I think what we're seeing, and we've mentioned this before, what we're seeing is a breakdown of the old order in which traditional parties of left and right have suffered.
It's certainly true that mainstream left and right have suffered, but the mainstream social democratic parties have suffered much more. We have a conservative prime minister in Britain. We have a centrist president in France. We're going to have a centre-left, centre-right chancellor in Germany. None of the above applies to the social democrats. Why?
I mean, it is fascinating. I can remember, around the time, not long after the crash, being at a Party of European Socialists event, and I think there was a sense amongst my sister parties that this was going to be the great
hour
moment.
had come.
This was going to be a great moment, and it didn't work out like that. And if you look at France, our sister party vote in France is down to 6%. In Holland, it's 6%. I think for the SPD in Germany, it's 16% at the moment.
In the latest polls, they got about 20 in the election.
Why is that happening? I think, it's a combination of things. I think that actually, it is about elites. I think there's an anti-elitism coming from the far right, and some of the more far left parties that have emerged across Europe. But again, I think it's also about us, with my sister parties not being able to provide the answers of how do we deal with globalisation, how do we deal with immigration, how do we deal with the fact that there have been changes in terms of our class identity as well. And for all those reasons and many more, we haven't reaped, if that's the right word, the benefit of a major collapse that was the responsibility of the banks.
But Savoy, if, as you say, the Social Democrats have failed and the neo-Marxist left has failed, you give an example of that as Greece, exactly who's going to reinvent the left?
First, I'm not saying it will necessarily happen. Maybe it will not. But again, as I said in the short film, the problem for me is that if nothing happens, we are caught in a very sad, deadly cycle where we are all moving towards this, and this is the saddest phenomenon today, this gradual rise of new...
In what way is Britain moving towards that?
No, Britain is even not so
said,
bad
well, you
here.
said, well,
I think countries...
You said we're all moving. Britain's not. France is not. France has a government renowned for its moderation.
In Europe, we still hold it somehow. But if you look all around the world...
But it's the European social
Trump,
democracies
Putin,
we're talking about.
To China and so on. For the first time, democracy, as we like it in Europe, is losing.
So you say that, and that's the dire consequence, but you can't tell us who's going to reinvent the left.
Now, it will sound strange for some kind of a leftist that I am, but I claim miracles do happen. By miracles, I mean this. Who would have thought, for example, in the United States, that something like something like Bernie Sanders could have happened.
He lost.
It happened. He lost, but a movement remained. He got it, because what we should mention is in what sense what you, Michael, mentioned. Some kind of a strange class struggle is coming back. I think the big event in the United States was the split between Steve Bannon and Trump. Steve Bannon was a kind of a...
Right, but that's on the right. I'm trying to get to the bottom of this widespread retreat of social democracy, because let's not forget, social democracy was at the heart of rebuilding post-war Europe.
Yeah,
Social democratic parties
over.
in Scandinavia. Right,
Yeah,
that's
that's
fine.
the problem.
But what I don't understand, if in your view 50 shades of left have failed, why would the 51st shade work? Again, I just say to you, Bernie
I can give you an answer.
Bernie Sanders was not reinventing the left. Bernie Sanders was introducing the left for the first time into America.
Yeah, but
there
this
was nothing
an
new.
authentic miracle,
There was
because
nothing
till now,
new about
and I
his
agree here
leftism.
with you, with both of you, that the problem not only of the mainstream liberal center, but even of the left, was that it was in a hidden way elitist, avoided certain issues and so on, and that was the answer your central question. I think that the issues that we are facing today, and you can even not call what I'm expecting to happen a left. We have ecological problems, which need some kind of a wide...
But do you understand that actually, not just in this country, but across Europe, working class people who traditionally would vote for the sister parties of the Labour Party here in the UK, moved away from that to many of them moving to right-wing parties because they felt, for one reason or another, that Europe's inability to get on hold of immigration, some of the things we've seen in terms of the refugee crisis, you know, writ large when, you know, Merkel announced in terms of people... that has had enormous impact.
Right.
And the problem is that the centre-left hasn't...
We know
dealt with
the
that.
analysis is where do we go from here? Everyone's
Well,
very
I
good
think-
at analysing.
well, I
I'd
think
put this to you, Caroline.
Yes.
The one social democratic party, at least from a social democratic tradition in Europe, that is still doing well is Labour, is the British Labour Party. And that's the one that has moved most to the left.
Yes, you're right. And
So-
but I think part of that is...
Isn't that a solution?
But I think part of it is that what the traditional voters who voted Labour do like about what Labour is saying is about tackling some of the things we didn't tackle before, about globalisation, about how we have to have a rebalanced economy, about talking about how we address some of the issues about the fact that we have had, since the crash, people's wages kept down, their rights undermined. There is appeal there. But the other part of that is we also have to talk to people's concerns about immigration. Those same people have those views.
But hold on. The French socialists didn't move to the left. They did under Hollande to begin, but they moved back to the centre. They almost got wiped out. The German Social Democrats didn't move to the left. They got their worst vote since the 1940s. The Italian Social Democrats didn't move to the left. Indeed, they moved in a Blair direction. They were marginalised in the elections that have just taken place. So, you know, if you're a Corbynista, the lesson is quite clear, and it's not your lesson.
The contrast between Britain and the rest of the European Union would suggest to me that in the European Union we have had a trade-off between parties of the left that used to satisfy the working class vote, as you say. The working class vote has now moved to the extreme right. Some of it moved to the right in this country as well in the case of UKIP. But after Brexit, the question of immigration appeared to be answered. I'm not saying that it was answered, but it appeared to be answered because Brexit was the solution to it. And what happened? Suddenly the right-wing party disappeared altogether. Now, I also take the view that Labour is not going to win the next election because it has moved too far to the left. But just to make one other point, you say, where is the revival of the left going to come from? The revival of anything can come from leadership. If you have an outstanding personality, I mean, Macron to an extent has done this. You know, he's emerged from nowhere and taken over France. You know,
From the centre.
From the centre. Mrs. Merkel's day has come and gone. But there is an astonishing lack of charismatic leadership potential in Europe. By contrast, Trump, whatever you think of him, is a charismatic leader who's come from nowhere and taken over.
One last thought from you.
Yes. I think that the problem is very deep here, and I agree with both of you. There are central issues of immigration where, in the politically correct left, you are simply prohibited to mention them. I know this for my book Against the Double Blackmail, where, with all the sympathy for the suffering of the immigrants, I try to approach this. I say, if you want to solve this problem, first, we should not just play this humanitarian game, do we have open heart and accept them, but let's confront real problem of cultural differences and so on, and point two, let's act preemptively, like we are tolerating the civil war in Yemen and so on, and this is the breeding ground for new wave of immigrants and so on and so on. So if this doesn't change, it will happen. Point two, what I'm saying is that the left, the majority of the left, like the European traditional social democrats, people feel it. They really don't have a consistent, clear vision of what to do. And it's a big problem. It's not an easy problem. What to do? Obviously, the old state socialism will not work. These radical leftist dreams of, some direct democracy, local councils. No, if anything, I'm here a kind of a state philosopher. We will need to cope with ecology and so on. Large form of international coordination to solve these problems and so on and so on. I'm not talking about the continuation of the same left, but the reason I have a minimal hope is that sooner or later, these problems are pressing on us. Ecology, immigration, international order, financial chaos, even problems like biogenetics. Who will control it? Are we aware what is happening in China, where the state already has plans to coordinate the biogenetics of the population to keep them quiet, patriotic? The only answer to this is from what I call left. Nothing to do with the old communist left or whatever, but a kind of a organized confronting this problem and just repeating, my God, what Bill Gates and they are saying. Capitalism alone can't work.
On Chinese biological policy, we're going to have to end it. We haven't got time to do into that.
Yeah, but it's a crucial event.
I'm sure it is, but I'm still trying to work out the future of European social democracy. Anyway,
social democracy as we know it.
All right.
Something have to get.
Okay. No, that's it. No, thank you.
British Labour Party.
Yeah, we do know that.
What will they do if we come to power?
Sorry, we have to move on. We have other guests, so we need to move on.
Okay.
Thank you. It's late. Emma Watson late. Yes, the fragrant Hermione of Harry Potter fame caused a Twitter storm the week over her Time's Up fake tattoo, which she proudly displayed at the Oscars. The problem was that, shock horror, the artwork on her arm was missing an apostrophe before the S. The grammar police went into a frenzy. English teachers fainted. Tattoo parlours went into lockdown to escape public wrath. Me, I see a career opportunity. I've offered my services as a tattoo proofreader. Someone we feel sure is never short of apostrophes and punctuation, a master of pauses, clauses and applauses, is comedian, poet and podcaster Phil Jupitus, who will be putting grandstanding in the spotlight. And if you'd like to get up to some nocturnal grandstanding with your usual unfathomable musings on the Twitter, the Fleecebook and Snap Numpty, my strong advice is don't bother. The world's oldest known message in a bottle was found washed up in a beach this week after 132 years. That's about how long we'll take to get round to your social media drivelling. French President Emmanuel Macron is under attack from the usual health police busybodies for defending every French president's right to drink wine twice a day, at lunch and dinner. That's our kind of president. Though we understand Jean-Claude Juncker has been on the phone to the Élysée Palace from Brussels to complain that he didn't include breakfast. President Trump, on the other hand, doesn't drink at all. Maybe he's too busy tweeting, though this week he's been surprisingly silent on the suspected Russian involvement in the attempted assassination of a foreign agent who sold secrets to MI6. Now, I wonder why that is. Maybe his phone battery is dead. Anyway, these are dark times when we're all in need of a hero. So here's our very own Wonder Woman, Viv Groskop, with our roundup of the week.
This week needs help. We all know that. I can't work miracles, but let me see what I can do. What a challenge I face. I've got to sort out Brexit, fix the housing situation, and on top of all that, this week have put me in Michael's favourite fancy dress outfit. It's a good job I've got superhero resilience. I bet Theresa May wishes she had some superpowers as she attempts to push through Brexit with a divided country and party. That said, her big speech last week was well received and she returned to the House of Commons with a surprising confidence.
We are close to agreement on the terms of a time-limited implementation period to give governments, businesses and citizens on both sides time to prepare for our new relationship, and I am confident we can resolve our remaining differences in the days ahead. Now we must focus on our future relationship. A new relationship that respects the result of the referendum, provides an enduring solution, protects people's jobs and security, is consistent with the kind of country we want to be, and strengthens our union of nations and people.
I sympathise with Theresa May. Fighting the forces of negativity is hard work. And this week, her European friends revealed their lack of optimism as they published their draft negotiation guidelines.
Our agreement will not make trade between the UK and the EU frictionless or smoother. It will make it more complicated and costly than today for all of us. This is the essence of Brexit. A pick and mix approach for a non-member state is out of the question.
I wonder what he could mean. Spreadsheet Phil made it clear the government wants to protect the city and could reject any trade deal that doesn't include financial services.
We do not expect the same relationship we have today across all areas of activity in financial services. Trade-offs should be expected, and the industry will change. But we should ensure that the future partnership strengthens European stability and prosperity rather than weakening it.
He's looking to a TTIP type deal. Now, TTIP, after 3 years, well, 3.5 years of negotiation, collapsed. But in addition to that, what TTIP did, it actually took powers away from Parliament and gave it to corporate lawyers. So this flies in the face of everything that people voted for in the referendum. This is not the way to go.
The Saudi prince's visit to the UK has caused a few raised eyebrows. It came as no surprise in Westminster that Jeremy Corbyn, a passionate critic of the regime, used PMQs to make it clear he thought it was wrong to roll out the red carpet. However, Theresa May successfully maintained the party line.
Mr. Speaker, it cannot be right that her government is colluding in what the United Nations says is evidence of war crimes. Will the Prime Minister use her meeting today with the Crown Prince to halt the arms supplies and demand an immediate ceasefire in Yemen?
We are all concerned about the appalling humanitarian situation in Yemen and the effect it is having on people, particularly the effect it's having on women and children. When I went to Saudi Arabia in December, I met with the Crown Prince. I raised with him then the need to open the port of Hodeidah to humanitarian and commercial supplies. I'm pleased to say that Saudi Arabia then did just that. This vindicates the engagement that we have with Saudi Arabia to be able to sit down with them.
Is that Captain America, the human pinnacle of perfection I can see in the distance? Oh, it's just clumsy old Boris. And when the Foreign Secretary had to address Parliament on the sensitive issue of the poisoning of a former Kremlin double agent, he seemed unsure whether to go for broke or exercise diplomatic restraint.
While it would be wrong to prejudge the investigation, I can reassure the House that should evidence emerge that implies state responsibility, then Her Majesty's government will respond appropriately. Russia, I'm afraid, is now in many respects a malign and disruptive force. Thinking ahead to the World Cup this July, this summer, I think it will be very difficult to imagine that UK representation at that event could go ahead in the normal way.
Where is my lasso of truth?
These people have been used by the foreign media for an anti-Russian campaign. It's a traditional campaign. The tradition is to make things up. We can only see it as a provocation.
Oh, whoops, I probably shouldn't have done that, seeing as we need all the bricks and mortar we can get. There was certainly no shortage of these when the Prime Minister delivered her warning to developers not to restrict the housing supply this week. Now, where is that woman who looks as if she's stuck up a chimney?
But it's also time for builders and developers to step up and do their bit. The bonuses paid to the heads of some of our biggest developers are based not on the number of homes they build, but on their profits or share price. In a market where lower supply equals higher prices, that creates a perverse incentive, one that does not encourage them to build the homes we need.
Right, this week, I've completed my challenge. Next time you can call Supergran or Banana Man. I'm off to Lulu's to raise a toast to International Women's Day. Are you coming, Andrew and Michael? Drinks are on you.
Michael, Russia, if it is Russia or its surrogates behind this dreadful event in Salisbury, do we have many options?
I don't think we have many. I don't want to join in the blame against Boris Johnson for not saying more at the moment. It's striking that in this week we discovered for sure that about a year ago the half-brother of the North Korean leader was poisoned by that regime.
That's the one that happened at the airport, wasn't it?
That's the one that happened at the airport. And only after a year's investigation, which has proved really beyond any doubt that the North Korean regime was responsible, has the United States taken new sanction action against North Korea. And so I think, you know, the proper position for the British is to say that this needs to be proved beyond any doubt. You know, I suppose it's just about plausible that it could be another regime seeking to discredit the Russian regime. The one comfort I take from this is I ask myself what could be the motive for the Russians to do this. Revenge seems an insufficient motive. It seems to me that this very public and very brutal attempt at the execution of a former spy, with complete disregard to public safety and the safety of his family and so on. In fact, it seems like members of his family may also have suffered the same fate. Why has this been done? I think it is possibly that the Russians are sending a message to people who are active in the field today. In other words, it may be that Britain is scoring some important successes against Russian intelligence right now, and it is intended to put people on guard, whether maybe they're British agents or whether they're Russians who have been turned, that they will be pursued.
That we can get you.
That they will be pursued to death, and perhaps just as importantly, that their families will be annihilated as well. Now, that is not a cheerful thought, but the only thing that it makes me think is that Britain must be scoring some successes for such a terrible warning to be sent to us.
Because we'll probably never know that.
No.
Caroline, options?
Well, I agree with everything Michael said, but I think if it is found to be the case that this is a sort of Russian state-sponsored attack, attempted murder, maybe murder if people don't survive. Thankfully, the police officer seems to be doing better today. Then I think we do have to look at a number of options. There's issues around our diplomatic ties. There's issues about our in terms of economic sanctions. I know there are lots of people in London from Russia who don't necessarily agree with Putin, but there are also a number of other situations where there may be government officials who own properties or have assets here that we should look at as well. There's visas back and forth too. But I think it's actually really difficult, all this, because on so many different fronts, Putin is laying out a very, if you like, clear, we may not like it, but a very clear narrative to his own people about what he's about and what he thinks Russia should be about today. And we heard that in his speech about nuclear weapons just a few days ago. And actually, you know, part of it is the worrying thing is just what do you do about the problem called Russia?
I think, you know, while we're both being very cautious, we also have to recognise that weakness is punished by the Russians. And, for instance, the decision...
They got away with Litvinenko, didn't they?
They got away with that completely. I've never been satisfied that the death of Boris Berezovsky was sufficient.
Who was the oligarch who came to live in
Who was
London?
the oligarch who was found hanged in this country. I've never been satisfied with the investigation of that. But what I actually meant was, we've just had a decision, I think, by the Olympic Committee that the Russians will be readmitted to sport, even though there's been state-sponsored doping of their athletes. Well, you know, if all we're ever going to do with the Russians is slap them on the wrist, of course we can expect a very vigorous
and you're right, they do
continuance of their policy.
They do spot weakness and exploit it and do it again. Saudi Arabia, are we right to, do we have an alternative to engaging?
Engaging with Saudi Arabia?
Yes.
Well, we do have to engage with Saudi Arabia, absolutely, and it's a complicated relationship. I think Theresa May was right today on Wednesday when she said that our relationship with them in terms of information has probably helped to save lives here in the UK, but it's also a very difficult relationship because there is no doubt the bombing tactics they've taken in the Yemen, I think everybody would agree, have been beyond what was necessary, to say the least. As you said earlier, there's a new Crown Prince. Come June, women will be able to drive. There are other things happening for women in Saudi Arabia, which I welcome, but there's been double the number of beheadings since he's been in charge, and he's not a Democrat in the way that we would think about these things.
Because they're in quite short supply in Saudi Arabia.
Well, no, exactly. And they're having to face out to the world because, of course, they don't want to just rely on oil anymore. I think 70% of their population are under the age of 30, and there just aren't the jobs there. So is there an opportunity to speak some home truths, but also take advantage of the fact that they are having to look out to the world maybe more than they have done so before, and he's up for that. But in doing so, there's an opportunity as well to lay down some home truths about what we believe is acceptable or not.
It is apparently a very special relationship with Saudi Arabia. I mean, let me just lay out the following facts. I think 18 Saudis were involved in killing 3,000 people in New York City.
In 9/11.
On 9/11, and the response was to attack Iraq. I think Saudi Arabia is responsible for building mosques with the aim of promoting Wahhabism throughout Europe.
Including in this country.
Including this country, which represents, at least indirectly, a threat to our security.
And in the Balkans, I think, as well.
And in the Balkans, in Bosnia, for example. And these things not only go unpunished, but actually unremarked. Why is it such a special relationship? I think because of the intelligence, because we can't countenance the collapse of the Saudi regime because of the chaos that would create in an oil-producing state, and because of our relationship on defence. So this is very complicated. It is realpolitik. And very briefly, the last Labour government under Robin Cook espoused an ethical foreign policy. It didn't go anywhere. But if you're going to have an ethical foreign policy, then it has to be an all-embracing one. And you have to cut off not only Saudi Arabia, but I dare say a number of nations in the Middle East, Russia, China, which has the worst possible record on the death penalty. And if the death penalty is your criterion, you probably have to cut off the United States as well.
Mr. Barnier, the negotiating position, what do you make of it?
Well, I think that, you know, what's clear is that for all the talk about, you know, cherry picking and what have you, at the end of the day, there will be cherry picking of one form or another, both from the EU side and both from the UK side. I don't think there's, outside of the EU, the Norway option, the Canada option, all of that is about cherry picking to a certain extent, what fits in to keep relationships strong. And I do think that, you know, with more detail now being talked about, I think a bit of more of a sense of urgency about how big this challenge is, because it's enormous. I mean, just on trade, on the Public Accounts Committee this week, I think it's something like 800 trade agreements that we're tied into within the EU that we're going to have to think about how we're going to negotiate them going forward. So I think, you know, that hopefully, and I do hope this, most sincerely actually, that we start seeing some real detail and get some sort of sense that there's some momentum, for want of a better word, behind all this. But I do think there's a lot of talk on both sides that
when
is
you cut
ridiculous.
through the talk and you look at the positions, you can see the makings of a deal.
Yeah, well, I've always thought that. But when you referred to cherry picking right at the beginning of the programme from the EU point of view, I suppose that was a reference, was it, to the fact they say we might be able to do a deal on free trade, but it won't include banking. It won't include financial services.
What they're saying, and it's their position to start the negotiations. Why would you not? They're saying we'll have free trade in goods, where we the Europeans run a massive surplus with you, but we won't have free trade in services where you run a massive surplus with us, and we want complete access to your fishing waters, but you can't have access to European financial services. I mean, these are just the kind of opening.
Yeah.
The problem is that so much of this coverage seems to think, well, that's the European position, and that's how it will end up. Whereas it's just the opening gambit.
No. It is indeed the opening gambit, but I must say the EU is, I think, more successful at putting out opening gambits than we are.
Yes.
And again, as you implied in your opening remarks, I think the British media is extremely gullible at interpreting every opening gambit of theirs as being a kind of defeat in the making for us, and that is not the case at all. There's a lot of strength to the British position.
We need to move on. It's been a week when the air has been thick with public figures rushing to attach themselves to worthy causes, from International Women's Day to poverty to rough sleeping to healthy eating to #MeToo. All manner of celebrities, from Oscar winners down, have been vocal in letting us know that they really care about more than lots of dosh and a free designer frock for the red carpet. Indeed, these days it seems to be part of an actor's job spec that it involves letting us know how they feel about the latest pressing issue du jour. Commendable concern for society's ills, or as fake as the tattoos they wash off when the cameras have moved on. Tonight we're putting political grandstanding in the spotlight. It's that time of year again when Hollywood celebrities grace us with their wardrobes and their politics. Yes, it's Oscars week. And on this year's red carpet, outrage was all the rage. Frances McDormand took a rousing roll call.
Meryl, if you do it, everybody else will. Come on. The filmmakers, the producers, the directors. I have 2 words to leave with you tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Inclusion rider.
But was Emma Watson's fake tattoo upstanding or just grandstanding? Even Theresa May didn't miss an opportunity to show she's woke too.
First of all, can I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for telling me that it is International Women's Day tomorrow. I think that's what's called mansplaining.
And was MP Philip Davis grandstanding or being deliberately provocative when he attempted to stand up for men in a serious debate about misogyny?
I just wondered whether we could take it as read, therefore, that she thought that misandry should also be a hate crime in exactly the same way.
It is precisely because of the power imbalance in society that is disproportionately affecting women in a negative way.
Meanwhile, obesity warrior Jamie Oliver says the middle-class elites have got to stop grandstanding when it comes to overeating.
This kind of idea that one brilliant idea can fix this doesn't work. Believe you me, it doesn't work.
But are we all missing out on the real progressive issues? Prince Charles asks, when did married women start using their maiden name?
I thought to myself some time ago, who's Cheryl Tweedy? And I suddenly realised that I knew the Cheryl bit. I'd missed out on the Tweedy.
Comedian Phil Jupitus hates grandstanding, but tough Phil, get on your soapbox and grandstand with the rest of us. And Phil joins us now. Phil, are we seeing more grandstanding?
I think that it's people when they get that platform. There's a number of things at work here. I think that firstly, the number of advisors that people have saying you're going to have this opportunity, particularly people who are active, consider themselves, sort of socially aware and active. It's very, very tempting when you know you're going to have something like the Oscars with millions of people watching it, and you're going to have the opportunity to say something or do something or make some sort of gesture. It's so tempting for them to do it.
But it's become endemic now, hasn't it?
Well,
I mean,
yeah,
it used to. I mean,
yeah.
I remember there was the famous British actress who made a statement years ago about the Palestinians.
Yeah, it was
Vanessa Redgrave.
Vanessa Redgrave,
and
yeah.
that was quite a surprise. And it was controversial.
The early days of it, yeah.
But and she was alone when she did that. It wasn't a common thing. Now, almost everybody, when they get up to take an award, has to make... And they do it knowing that the audience in front of them is entirely on their side. It's not a brave thing to do.
The interesting thing about the McDormand was that that thing that she said about the inclusion rider. I didn't know about that, and so I think that was actually. I think there's people that were watching that and saw that, and people that will be going into the industry that would not even be aware that that was an option for something they could do. So something like that, I actually thought was quite clever because it was very minimal, all of that. But what you've got to remember about grandstanding is that they are in showbiz, and so an element of what they do is about changing the energy of an audience and making them think in a certain way, and also projecting an image of themselves. Yes. So I never like grandstanding in music, in rock, in stadium rock. That's where I don't like it, because it's that you almost get the sense that there's an element of a sort of messianic complex has crept into something.
When you get 80,000 people
when you
in
see
front
them
of
there.
yeah.
I mean, if you think, imagine if we did this show live every night to 80,000 people that were going, oh, yeah, Portillo. Yeah,
well, that would be 5.
It'd be wonderful if we had 80,000.
But it would. How can it not get into your head and start making you think, I can control these people. They will do my will, and
more broadly, the assumption that if you can act or if you can play a guitar, that you're qualified to make big, broad political statements. That this has suddenly empowered you to do this, qualified you to do this.
But is it wearing thin?
I think. Well, no. The thing is now is because social media, everybody has a platform to express that view. That in the 80s, people with guitars and microphones at stand-up gigs and at rock gigs and at red wedge gigs, they were doing that. But
some of them were quite
everybody.
It's always been much more, I think, of a sort of an American thing, though. I mean, when you look at the film stars who really come out strongly for the Democrats and to a certain extent for the Republicans, compared to big name, that we have here. I mean, we have sometimes TV people with their own celebrity, but when you have the sort of Jessica Lange, Robert De Niro, and all these are big stars coming out. But I suppose I look at someone like. Say, take someone like Leonardo DiCaprio. You don't hear much about it, but he does a huge amount putting his personal wealth into environmental causes, but he's not up there all the time talking about it.
Yeah, listen, we've running out of time for reasons that people who were with us from the start will understand.
That was a great reason. I loved it.
So I'm sorry with that, but before we go, what are you up to now?
I'm on a tour called Duplicity. I'll be playing Manchester on the 17th and Poole on the 12th. They're 2 gigs that I could do with shifting some tickets. But yeah,
Manchester and
Poole in
Get
Dorset.
out and buy.
Yes,
now,
mate.
get the tickets going.
Yeah.
And no
Thanks,
no grandstanding.
Mate, he's talking to that cabbie now. What a drive home that is.
Let's hope it's not a long one. Phil, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
That's your lot for tonight, folks. Not for us, though. We're off to Lulu's for a late-night poetry reading by the Chancellor, because ever since he admitted that Dr. Seuss's Cat in the Hat was his favourite book, Spreadsheet Phil has been inspired to set next Tuesday's spring statement to rhyme. And we've managed to obtain an exclusive extract. So are you sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. For we looked and we saw that incredible chap, the Treasury's main man, the Cat in the Hat, and in his red box he had ideas a-cobbled, which he wanted to use in case the economy wobbled. Oh, might there be answers on pensions and care, austerity eased, a society more fair, less tax on green eggs, investment in ham, or would it, or could it, be a horrible scam? Nighty-night, don't let Michael's mud bath bite.
Пожалуйста, снимите шортики и снимите полотенце, да?
Oh, okay, shorts off. And the attendants are strict disciplinarians.
Снимайте, вот это вот снимаем. Все хорошо?
Очень хорошо.
Все?
I'm telling you that it's very, very good. I mean, actually, there is a fearful smell of rotten eggs, and underneath me there's all this really sticky, muddy stuff. Look at that. But it feels soft and it's meant to do you lots of good. Good for the skin, good for the bones, good for the joints. I'm really pleased I'm here. And as they say in the movie business, it's a wrap.